Hi, my name's Phil. I like talking about politics, and in this video I'd like to discuss the news that Boris Johnson has been handed the findings of the Privileges Committee inquiry into his Partygate lies in Parliament. We are about 3 weeks away from finding out what this year-long investigation has concluded and potentially the beginning of a new Tory civil war. But first, if you'd like to be notified of daily news and politics, please subscribe to the channel. So, reports suggest that Johnson's been handed the findings and intended outcome of the inquiry. That would include the punishment, if any, but there's going to be one, which the committee have decided should apply. Boris Johnson's been given 2 weeks to respond, after which the committee will consider his response, presumably take a week, and then make their findings public. So that means that if Johnson takes the full 2 weeks to respond, we're going to find out at the end of this month. It will, no doubt, be an announcement of grand theatre. This has been an inquiry into the conduct of an MP and minister like no other during my lifetime. Usually these things sort of pass you by. They just happen. They happen all the time. But such is Johnson's complete lack of respect for basic decency and his willingness to weaponise the political divisions which he helped foster, that the committee has had to sort of bend over backwards, almost creating new ways of managing things in order to prevent Johnson being able to make any complaints about any part of the process. Take the recent experience of Margaret Ferrier, suspended for 30 days by Parliament. That is not one of the just normal investigations. 30-day suspension is huge. That tells you that the charges against her were incredibly serious, and they were. But there was no messing about. The committee proceeded as it would against any MP. Ferrier didn't seem to kick up more than an expected amount of fuss over the matter. But anyway, what happens now with Boris Johnson? Well, nobody's allowed to divulge any of the details of the findings until the committee announce it. So I wouldn't expect any leaking. But if I were a journalist, I would try to gauge Johnson's mood for some clues. See, Boris Johnson's not exactly a great poker player. If he's put under pressure about the matter, then I think his reaction will be telling. He may come across as cheerful or irascible, and I think you'll be able to read into that. Of course, it may be that Johnson hides away from the public for the next fortnight to avoid this. I mean, Parliament is still in session, so in theory he's supposed to be working, but as he's only turned up to Parliament to vote 3 times since stepping down as Prime Minister last September, I hardly think he'll think twice about not turning up for the next 2 weeks. In terms of what happens to the Conservative Party and how much popcorn we need to buy, that depends on quite a few things, actually. It depends on the punishment, first of all. Being clear, it's obvious that Johnson cannot be cleared of all charges. He did lie about the rules being followed. The best outcome he can hope for is for there to be enough doubt about how consciously he lied. He was reported a while ago to be willing to accept a finding of recklessly misleading Parliament rather than deliberately, as if the findings are a matter of plea bargaining. But the actual findings are not of prime importance, really. He lied. He deliberately lied. Anyone with a brain and a passing interest in the case can see that. You could see the way he was smirking during his hearing whenever he thought he'd given a clever answer. The breaches at Downing Street were so obvious and regular, nobody could think he just misunderstood his own rules. No, what matters is the punishment. And the punishment will be binary, because nobody cares about the length of suspension. That doesn't matter. Johnson has effectively suspended himself from Parliament for the best part of a year already. Now, what matters is whether he continues as an MP. The punishment will either be 10 days or more, or it will be less than 10 days. If it's less, then that means Boris Johnson continues as an MP, and it will be seen as an obvious stitch-up by the majority Tory committee. I don't know how much Labour and the Lib Dems in particular will hammer this point, because they will not want to accuse the committee of being biased, but it will certainly be seen by the public, especially those members of the public who did suffer very badly from lockdowns, as a Tory stitch-up. Remember the public backlash when they tried to get Owen Paterson off? Nobody even knew who Owen Paterson was. Imagine the outcry if this committee gets Boris Johnson off. So I suppose the more likely outcome is that the punishment will be appropriate. It will be 10 days or more. MPs will then have to vote in it. Now, this is where a lot of Tory MPs are going to be finding themselves having to play a bit of a political game. See, they'll know that their vote won't really matter that much. In theory, if every Tory MP voted against it, then it goes down. The Tories have got a majority. But the vast majority of Tory MPs are not going to vote against the suspension. If they were prepared to do that, they would have voted against the investigation from the start. But some may abstain. Quite a lot may abstain, depending on how the issue is seen in their local area. Some will vote against it, of course, but the punishment will be passed, and so Johnson will be after revenge, and so will his allies in the media. Tory MPs, especially those vulnerable next year, will want to think very carefully about how they deal with the vote. This will be the beginning of an intended civil war, which Johnson will wish to trigger. Whether it happens or not is another matter. One of his mates in the media has described the consequences of a recall level suspension being a Boris Johnson-sized wave. In reality, I don't think Boris Johnson has much support in the parliamentary party. He does in the media, though, and they will think nothing of causing immense damage to their party if it doesn't do as they ask. See, the relationship between the Tory party and the Tory media, it's not one of the media backing up the politicians. The politicians are not in charge here. The politicians are expected to do what the media barons tell them to do, or else. If Johnson's recalled, he then has the choice of standing in the by-election. I don't think he will. Like, you may be aware of a poll that was published this week, conducted by Lord Ashcroft, who is a pollster, which says that Johnson would comfortably win the by-election. The poll is a load of bollocks and has been roundly dismissed by more independent pollsters and statisticians. It's a complete joke of a poll. If Johnson were to put it to the test, he would be badly shown up. See, I don't think he wants to. I think he knows the poll's bollocks. I think Ashcroft knows the poll's bollocks. But I do think Johnson will use the poll for his own purposes. Let me have a little guess as to what I think is going to happen over the next year with Boris Johnson. So if the suspension is for 10 days or more, it will pass Parliament by hook or by crook. And then Johnson will be recalled. He will then be asked if he's going to stand in the by-election. I mean, I can see how this sort of goes. You go, why should I have to do that? I won it, you see. It's a witch hunt. It's a witch hunt. I won the seat in 2019. In fact, I won every seat in the country. I got the largest majority. A very conservative leader, this is Margaret Thatcher. It's an absolute outrage. It's betrayal. I'm not standing for my own seat. It's my seat. I'm going to retire from politics. I'm going to go. I've just bought a house in Henley, you see. It's a rather splendid house. It has a moat. Very useful to have a moat because it stops one wandering too far on naked sleepwalk Saturdays, you see. So I'm going to Henley and you can all wallow in the fruits of your own labours. And he'll go off and then the by-election will happen. And Labour will win that by-election. And Boris Johnson will pop up again. He'll go, I would have won it, you know. I would have won it. There was a rather splendid poll by my friend Lord Ashcroft. When I say friend, I mean acquaintance. I don't really know him very well, you know. And he said I would have won it, you see. And I would have won it. But I don't see why I should have. And then he'll scratch around. And then Henley will decide it needs a candidate because he's bought this house in Henley, which is nowhere near his constituency. And Henley is the seat he used to have before he steps down to become Mayor of London. And the MP who replaced him has coincidentally announced that he will not be standing at the next election. And he, again, coincidentally announced that a few weeks after Boris Johnson bought the house. So what will happen is Boris Johnson will trot along to the meeting that decides who their candidate's going to be. And he'll go, I'm here to support your candidate, you see, as a good little Conservative. And he'll look around and go, oh dear, you don't seem to have any very good candidates. Oh no, Henley must have a good candidate. It must have someone of gravitas. I mean, I retired from politics, you see. But if you can't get a decent candidate, I mean, I would be prepared to be your candidate. I mean, you all think I'm marvellous. I should be Henley's candidate, I think. And then, they'll all go, oh, Boris, you're the best. Yeah, you could be our candidate. And he'll go, oh, splendid. I'm very honoured. Thank you very much. I shall do my best. By which he means he will do nothing at all. But he expects to win it because it'll be a safe Tory seat. However, it will then transpire come the election that there is no seat safe enough for Boris Johnson to win. And if there's some tactical voting and whoever is best placed to replace him, I imagine it'd be the Lib Dems, is given a fairly clear run by others, then Boris Johnson may well find that he cannot even win the safe seat of Henley. And there he will be the day after the general election, when the results have been called out, 3 or 4 o'clock in the morning. He'll be there in a sports hall, hair looking like it's been combed with a balloon. And the returning officer will read out the results, and the Conservatives have lost. And then Boris Johnson will go, he'll be going, oh no. Think, Boris, think. How can I turn this into someone else's fault? And then that hopefully will be the end of Boris Johnson's political career. But there we go. That's what I think will happen there. Now, as for from Rishi Sunak's point of view, so Johnson exiting Parliament could potentially be a double-edged sword, because on the one hand, Johnson will not be in a position to replace him. So the rebellions will be largely aimless. They'll still chunter, but it's like, what's their aim? They can't replace Sunak with Johnson because he's not in Parliament. Johnson's supporters will have to accept that Johnson cannot become Prime Minister again, at least not for a long time. But the cries of betrayal will echo around the pages of the Tory media all the way up to the election and beyond. However, that being said, it looks like he's going to escape the damaging by-elections I talked about yesterday. See, we woke up to the news that Nadine Dorries and Alex Sharma have been removed from the honours list and will go back to vetting, with Johnson's father also removed from the list. Now, I'm not sure of the exact details, but I owe Rishi Sunak an apology. Because yesterday I said I could well understand how he was going to let the resignation honours list go through, because there's no real argument not to, other than Boris Johnson's an arsehole, but you could say that about any Prime Minister. Or at least some people would say it about any Prime Minister. But I said yesterday he should have at least taken issue with certain honours, in particular the Alex Sharma and Nadine Dorries, because that's going to trigger a damaging by-election. Well, it seems he has done so. It seems he did so. It seems he said, look, we're not having these damaging by-elections, and he's sent their list back to vetting, and he's also taken Boris Johnson's father off the list, who was going to be getting a knighthood, as being like clearly inappropriate. So actually, Sunak can get some things right after all, it seems. He has got a little bit of backbone. Good, fine. I apologise. So if we work on the basis that the vast majority of Tory MPs don't want to start a civil war over Boris Johnson, and I think that's reasonable to suppose, then, and there won't be any unnecessary by-elections for him to fight, because he's not going to allow, I mean, they can stand down, but if he's at least not going to allow them to go to the Lords, there's not much they can do about it. Apart from Boris Johnson's current seat, there's not a lot he can do about that. And indeed, on balance, that's probably positive for him. And if we assume the media, okay, they'll rant and rage, but as long as they get bored and decide, actually, they don't want to usher in a Labour government, so they will swing behind the party as the election draws near, once they realise that Sunak is actually going to lead them into it, then actually, yeah, he could ride this one out. But whatever happens, I do think he is probably better off with Johnson kicked out of Parliament, even if it does trigger a bit of a backlash, than allowed to stick around causing trouble. Because Johnson is just going to cause trouble until he's Prime Minister again. So he can cause much less trouble outside of Parliament than inside it. But there we are. Those are my thoughts. Let me know yours in the comments below. Hope you found the video interesting. If you did, please click the like button. If you'd like to support the channel further, the join button for memberships. And until next time, I'll see you later.